Reading today is about Israel leaving Egypt, right? And wandering in the desert the first time, right? And God's not done with Egypt, as we see, right? He judged Egypt and their gods, but now it's time for uh, Pharaoh to be judged as well. And and so he causes Israel to wander uh, in what we know as Sinai Peninsula, even though that's the wrong name because the Sinai is not in that peninsula. But anyways, but it makes it look like that they're wandering. And it says by Migdol. Well, Migdol means tower. So Egypt had towers on the different parts of their border there, and so they could see an enemy coming and send. Uh, there's an enemy coming from that direction, and so Migdol means tower. And so they sent word back to Pharaoh that they're just wandering in the desert. It's like no idea where they're going. And so Pharaoh takes it upon himself that why did we let these guys go? Let's go get them, bring them back, make them slaves again. But not only did all of Israel leave, but it says that a mixed company went with them. So these were people who were not descendants of Abraham, but they were from the nations, Nubians, Libyans, Cushites, Ethiopians, etc. Others who Pharaoh had made slaves. And the reason why they went with them is because they were people from the nations who believed what was going on. They believed when they were seeing the things that were going on, they realized that the God of Israel is the true God. And they believed in the promises that Moses gave, right? And so they went with them, right? And so they went with them. They seen all these things, and Pharaoh comes up. Israel is on the what we call the Reed Sea or the Red Sea today. It's known as the Reed Sea, is what it really is. It's a mistranslation. It should be Reed Sea, not Red Sea. But either way, we understand the story. And they're on the seashore. Well, there's only one spot, seashore, that could accompany or could hold that many people. And it describes that there was mountains to the north and to the south, and the Egyptians were on their east, and the sea was on the west, right? There's only one spot on that shoreline that would be able to do that. And what's interesting is that King Solomon built two large pillars with the story of the Exodus. One he put on the Egyptian side, one he put on the other side. Okay? And so they knew where the crossing was. And what's interesting is that those pillars were found many years ago now. The one on the Egyptian side, the wind had, uh, bore into it or whatever, and kind of caused the sand blasted away. Sand blasted away. So, but the one on the other side was still pretty much intact, where they could read it, and which would be on the Saudi Arabian side. So, so they crossed between what we call the Sinai Peninsula and into what we call Saudi Arabia today. And not only do we know where Mount Sinai is, but even the Arabs have known for a long time that it's there. They have another name for it, but today we know that it's Mount Sinai because everything works perfectly there. The scientists that went there were able to prove that that's where Mount Sinai was. But the Saudi Arabian government, after they found out what was going on, would not allow anybody to go there. They put up a huge fence all the way around the area, and it's patrolled by their military, so nobody can get in there. But we know where it's at. Those pillars were found, and the area was perfect. It met all the biblical description of where it was. And not only that, but it's the only place that goes from the Sinai Peninsula into Saudi Arabia that it raises up almost like a bridge underwater, comes up and goes straight across. And not only that, but the scientists who were, and they're still searching for stuff, have found remains of Egyptian chariots and swords and all kinds of stuff that are there. Now, a lot of it has been eroded away by the sea, but the urchins and what do they call them? The coral, stuff like that, have grown over these things, but left the shapes perfectly. Even though the wood and stuff is gone, the corals make a picture showing chariot wheels, swords, armor, even in that spot. Although a lot of people say, "Oh, that can't be it," because they crossed the Sinai Desert. That's why it's called the Sinai. And anyways, there's argue the point. But the thing is that the proof shows that most of them have been wrong for years, and even Israel accepts that. The Ministry of Antiquity has agreed that is the crossing, and even Saudi Arabia has agreed that the mountain that they have there, which they have named something different, is Mount Sinai. And because there's ancient artifacts of the Hebrews being there, pottery, carvings, different things that are there. So anyway, in this, God, let's say the thing is that God didn't make Pharaoh hard-hearted. He just allowed him, because he was already hard-hearted. He was already mad. He was already, it was already what was in him to do. Him to do that. So when it says God caused him to be hard-hearted, it means that he allowed him to do what he was about to do. And God knew that. And so they went after him. Children of Israel, seen him there, they started, you had a couple of different groups of people who believed Moses, a group that really didn't have any idea of anything, and then those who were just complaining. And the story goes that Nachshon, which would be one of Moses' nephews, went out with the people are getting mad at Moses, stuff like that, and Moses says, God, and God says to Moses, what? Stick your hands up and the sea will split. And at first it wasn't doing that, and the story goes that Nachshon by faith, started walking out into the sea. And as soon as it got up to his nose, then the water split. And of his faith, that's why we read about him later, not necessarily about that, but about some other stuff. He was a student of Moses, and he believed.
Kind of supports that idea because it says, tell the people to step into the sea.
Yeah.
And then it says Moses raised his hands over the sea and it parted.
So Nachshon was the first one to go, believing, having faith. And the water split. And I know we have scientists who it was the moon that was a little bit closer and caused the water to run out. Still isn't going to be dry ground, though. It's still going to be wet, right?
It's certainly not going to be walled up on
and they're not going to be walled up. That's what it says, walled up on both sides. So how can it be walled up if it just comes out, right? It doesn't make sense.
It intrigues me because, like, if it's a flowing water, right?
Mm-hmm.
What keeps this water from not flowing out? That it'd be walled up on this side, but this water would be empty then, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a dumb movie made a few years ago with Crowe, the actor, not Russell Crowe, Christian Bale. That's what I'm talking about. I'm sorry. That one was with Russell Crowe, was the one with Noah, but this is called the Exodus with Christian Bale, and again there they make Moses to seem like he's insane and stuff, and they use instead of the water being walled up, that the moon causes the tide to go out, and so it's dry land. Anyways, well, we know that's not true. No, exactly. It's not. There's no time for it. I mean, it was a miracle. It was a miracle. But not only that, but what we see here is that they have taken Joseph's bones with him, right? And this going through the water is like immersion or baptism. Israel was once the slaves of Pharaoh. Now that they've gone through the water to the other side, now they are a new nation, a new creation in essence, right? Just like what immersion does for us in that same thing, okay? But not only that, but they take Joseph, who is a picture of the Messiah, and going through the Red Sea is a picture of resurrection. Now, and we know that Joseph didn't come back to life or anything, but he returned with his people to the land of Israel, where he was properly buried there. But it's a picture of resurrection, that he was dead for a while. Then going through that with Israel, he in a sense rose again, okay, now with his people. Just as Yeshua was shared in that same picture with Joseph and with Moses, he was a prophet like Moses. The miracles, everything we see detailed things of there. Not that everything had, but there's symbolic things that he did that represented the things that Moses did. Okay? Including washing their feet. It's an interesting thing. Washing their feet. Why would he wash their feet? Now, back then, it was customary for when guests came to wash people's feet. But usually, that's when they come through the door. Or before they come through the door, they wash their feet. So you're not tracking sand and stuff like that in, right? But this is after the Seder is over. And this is what I believe, because the rabbis and sages do talk about that. The rabbi would take his important Talmudim, his important disciples, the ones who he thought were the leaders. And before Passover, sometimes the night before, he would do a symbolic Passover Seder in order to give them new instruction, that a new teaching, a new way of doing things. And so we look at this and we see, well, what's the new thing? It's washing their feet. Why? Because the feet represent Egypt. The dust and stuff before that, they're still in Egypt. But now that he has washed their feet, it's as if they walked through the Red Sea on dry ground. You see? And not only that, but he's given them this new instruction that we should do that for others. The other thing is it shows him being a servant. A king is not going to do that, right? But Yeshua, we know, is the king, but yet he shows us servant. And he also tells us that the greatest among us is the one who's servant of all, right? So we should be serving each other. That's why, even in the Passover Seder, why it says that, when we pour our wine, it says you pour for the other person to your right, okay? All right, you pour to the right, you pour for the other person, and somebody pours for you, okay? It's to show that we're all, even though we were slaves, we're all free now, but we're servants of one another. We're protectors. We're our brother's keeper or sister's keeper, whatever you want to say. All these things are here. They're all right there. And so we see, as Israel goes through there, that the enemies have perished. The water comes back on them. Pharaoh is drowned. Now, I know in some of the movies they show that Pharaoh escapes, but according to tradition, Pharaoh went in and drowned as well, which would make sense because Pharaoh had a legal grounds for Israel being his slaves. But the only way to do that would be to, one, take away the inheritor, which would be his son, and then take him away. They would have to die. And so we see that Pharaoh's son died when the angel of death came through, and then Pharaoh died, thus cutting off any legality to Israel. And that God purchased Israel by his deeds and by his word. In essence, we also see that also with Yeshua, that through Yeshua's, in a sense, sacrifice, his symbolic sacrifice, that God brought us back from the adversary, from the fall of Adam and Eve with the blood. Remember when they fell and they tried to make clothing out of fig leaves and stuff like that, but God had afterwards made skins for them, clothing out of skins. That was the blood in their place. Okay, instead of them dying, God used the animals to cover them. That's why, in essence, why we wear clothes and stuff, why we wore skins and stuff like that, was to remind us of our fallen state, because we were, before the fall, clothed in the Shekinah glory of God. You know, that's why at Havdalah, when we do blessing of the fire and stuff, we take the flames and we look at our fingernails and stuff, because in essence, it's kind of the way that it reflects off the fingernails is to show us our old state that we used to have before the fall, the glory. Okay. Now, as we go forward in this, they're heading to the land of promise, the promised land, the Messianic era, you might say. This, what we have read today in the Haftarah and 2 Samuel chapter 22, that whole chapter, it's David. It talks about David said these words of this song to Adonai on the day Adonai delivered him from the power of all his enemies and from the power of Shaul. Okay? Well, we have to look at this as a messianic. This is messianic. It's talking about the Messiah. Okay? It's talking about himself, but remember, Messiah is a descendant, a son of David. And we read through this, is that there's a war coming. When the Messiah comes, there's going to be a shaking. There's going to be... this is an interesting thing, too, is that in verse 7 it says, "In my distress I called to Adonai. Yes, I called to my God out of his temple." His temple. Where's his temple? In heaven, right? "He heard my voice, and my cry entered his ears. Then the earth quaked and shook. The foundations of heaven trembled. They were shaken because he was angry. Smoke arose in his nostrils, and from his mouth devouring fire with coals blazing from it. He lowered heaven and came down with thick darkness under his feet. He rode on the keruv, angels, cherubim, and flew. He was seen on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his canopy around him, thick clouds in the sky, dense with water from the brightness before him. Fiery coals flamed out." This is a picture of Yeshua coming to gather his people. And when we look at this is going to be the great Exodus. See, the Exodus that we read about with Israel is a picture of the greater Exodus that's to come when the Messiah comes. See, Moses is a Messiah. He is a type of Messiah. He's also of the order of what we refer to as the priesthood of Melchizedek. Okay? Why? Because he's the one who anoints the high priest. He's the one who does these things. God has set him as a priest, a priest in the order of Melchizedek of the heavenly temple. Okay? And he entered the heavenly temple, so he got the picture of making the tabernacle and stuff, which is a representation of the temple, right? And so Yeshua, it comes to get his people. He will take his people, Israel, from the four corners of the world, and those Gentiles from the nations, those people from the nations who have taken hold of Yeshua and joined Israel, okay? And he's going to bring them back to the land, back to Jerusalem, back to Israel, and with part of that, too, that we will take part, just as the children of Israel took part in the building of the tabernacle, we, too, will take part in the building of the third temple, okay? And once the third temple is set up, he will reinstitute the priestly office of the descendants of Aaron, who will continue to bring the offerings and stuff. as the prince, his job will be for the festivals and Passover, is that it is his job to bring the sacrifices for the people, to provide those for the people. We will still be able to bring offerings and sacrifice, stuff like that, but on those occasions, he will provide for the people. Okay? Just as it says, and we go in here and it's talking about, it talks about the nations and stuff. Let's see. In verse 38, I pursued my enemies and wiped them out without turning back until they were destroyed. I destroyed them, crushing them. They can't get up. They have fallen under my feet. For you braced me with strength for the battle and bent down my adversaries beneath me. You made my enemies turn their backs in flight so that I could destroy those who hate me. They looked, but there was no one to help, even to Adonai, but he didn't answer. I pulverized them like dust on the ground. I pounded and stamped on them like mud in the streets. You also freed me from the quarrels of my people. You kept me to be head of the nations. A people I did not know now serve me. Foreigners come cringing to me. The moment they hear of me, they obey me. Foreigners lose heart as they stagger from their fortresses. That's what's going to happen. And it does talk about that too, Ezekiel, where it says, and those nations that survive will come every year to the festival of Sukkot. Why Sukkot? We talked about it before. Sukkot is the festival for the nations. It's actually 8 days long, but there's 7 days in there that 70 oxen are offered up, a certain amount every day that equals 70, which represents the nations of the world. Okay? But on the 8th day, well, what is the number 8? 7 means completion. 8 is a number for new beginnings. On that day, only one ox for all the people is offered up. Okay? On the 8th day, which is after the Messianic era, after the 1,000-year reign, we will enter the world to come, the new day, the 8th new covenant that Yeshua made, complete form. Okay? That's when the new covenant will be. Right now we have a taste of it, but we'll continue even through the 1,000-year reign. The Torah will still be what we need to abide by. Okay? In this world and in the Messianic era, this is what we'll be doing. But in the world to come, the 8th day, it says that God is going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. No longer will they need to be taught about God because they will all know God. I'm kind of out of sense, but it's I will write it in their hearts and on their minds. Okay? See, and this is something we've talked about before too, is that right now our DNA changed at the time of the fall of Adam and Eve. It changed. It allowed a strand of DNA to change to do evil, sin, right? But at that time it says we changed in the twinkling of an eye. Okay, that our DNA, God is going to take that evil strand out and put in a righteous strand, so that no more will evil be in our hearts. No more will it be our desire. Everything that is Him will be who we are. And we will once again be in the image of God. Right now, we have that image in us, but it's like being blocked by us because of the evil. When God created us, He created us with a couple different souls. One is the nefesh, which is the animal instincts. But He also gave us the neshama, which is the higher spiritual soul that is in contact with God. And when Adam and Eve fell, the neshama no longer could contact us between him and us. You know, we became the nefesh. That's why people consider us to be animals, no different than animals and stuff, and will make excuses for, well, animals do it. We're animals, so we can do it too. But that's not true. We are a higher order. You know, we are a higher order because of the neshama. We know right from wrong. We know that we will die someday. Right? Animals don't know that, you know. They really don't. I mean, they have things that are really remarkable about them, and there's a thing to reason even that they can do, but it's limited. Not like us. Um, and that's why it says that all of creation is waiting for the sons of God, waiting for this time period when the world is remade in the image God said. He said that in that day that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. It's a renewing, bringing back the time before the fall for this world. But with this here, we see it's the Messianic era that Yeshua is talking about. Passover has to do with that. Passover is the first coming of the Messiah. But and here's an interesting thing I was reading too, is that it's not just that, it's not really that God passed over Israel, but he hovered over their houses. Whenever he seen the blood on their doorposts, he hovered over them to protect them. And not just Israel, but any of the from the nations who followed the order that Moses gave and did that too, he hovered over their house too to protect them. Okay? But death did pass over them. That's where we get Passover. But Pesach doesn't necessarily mean to pass over, but to hover, which is interesting. This is another meaning for it. But so God hovered over his people. And I also believe that during what is referred to as the tribulation, we're staying here. We will be a part of it. It's not until the end, but that God will hover over his people. Okay? Because we need to be a light for those who are in the darkness. We need to be a light. And if God takes the light away, what are the people going to do? Except perish, right? And our job is to be a light. Just as the moon reflects the light of the sun, we reflect the light of Messiah. And so the time is coming, and stuff, and Yeshua talks about it here, that I need to really talk about too, is that when he rose from the dead in victory, it's more than just that he rose. He didn't rise on Sunday morning. Okay? We believe and understand that, and even in many of the apostolic traditions, is that Yeshua was crucified on a Thursday. Friday was Passover. So it was a Sabbath. Then you had the weekly Sabbath on Saturday. There was no time in between there for them to go to the grave. But it says that early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark. That's what we refer to as Motzei Shabbat, right after the Shabbat. It's the same thing with Paul when he's teaching. They're gathered together. He's getting ready to leave the next day to go to the land of Israel so he can get back there, right? And a lot of people misinterpret that as saying that he was leaving Monday morning, that he preached from Sunday morning all the way to past midnight and stuff. That's not true. It was Saturday night after the Sabbath was over, and they gathered. Still a tradition today to gather. We call it the Havdalah, separating the Sabbath from the work week. And we eat and we sing and do stuff like that, you know. Today, the Jewish they met together, and Paul knew he was leaving Sunday morning, okay, when it was light out, okay. So he continued to give them teachings up till past midnight, right? And of course, we read about the young man that fell out of the window, and God used Paul to restore him back to life and stuff, right? Is when Yeshua rose from the dead after Sabbath, but still, in essence, that's right. You know, Motzei Shabbat, that evening, that evening, not the morning, not Sunday morning. And a lot of times, what we get too is the Sunday morning sunrise service and stuff. Really comes from pagan observances. All the different things that they have there, the Easter eggs, all these different things are pagan in origin. Yep. And the temple prostitutes would come out wearing these very thin clothing and special bonnets and stuff that they had for that day. It was a day of worshiping the sun. It was, what do they call it? Well, I know, what do they call it at the time period when the sun is, huh?
It does?
No. It's the time of year. You got a couple different times of the year. The
Oh, the solstice?
solstice, yeah, something like that, yeah. The spring solstice, basically. And that's how the church today, since the time of Constantine, is because they didn't want to know when Passover was, because then they're relying on the Jewish people, so they came out with the solstice or equinox. Equinox? Yeah. The spring equinox. And separated it from there. That's why you'll see Passover and Easter a lot of times do not fall during the same time. I mean, there's even times where Passover falls almost a month before Easter. Or sometimes we don't have Passover until after Easter. So that's why, because we're following the calendar God gave us. And they're following this other thing, you know. And that's why it's there. And so we need to be careful. But Yeshua says, it says here, early on the first day of the week, while it's still dark. Miriam. Not only that, but this is really interesting. Miriam from Magdala, right? She goes, sees that he's gone, runs, tells the disciples, hey, I don't know where his body is. They took him. We got Kepha and Yochanan running to the tomb, and they see the same thing. They see the angels, and they go back. Miriam stays there still. And this is really cool. Okay. Let's see, I think it's verse 14. As she said this, she turned around and saw Yeshua standing there, but she didn't know it was he. Yeshua said to her, Lady, why are you crying? Whom are you looking for? Thinking he was the gardener. Hello, who is Adam? What did God put Adam in the garden for? Gardener, right? Thinking he was the gardener. Isn't it interesting? It relays back to Adam. Remember, he's the second Adam, right? He's a gardener. His assumes that he's the gardener. I thought that was really cool. Yeah.
Another thing is, if it was pitch black out because it was early on the first day when it was still dark, she wouldn't be able to recognize him because it was dark out.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It was dark. It says she wouldn't be able to recognize him at first, right? But basically, she says, "Sir, if you are the one who carried him away, just tell me where you put him, and I'll go and get him myself." Yeshua said to her, "Miriam." Turning, she cried out to him in Hebrew, "Rabbani," that is my teacher. "Stop holding on to me," Yeshua said to her, "because I have not yet gone back to the Father, but go to my brothers and tell them that I am going back to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Miriam of Magdala went to the Talmudim with the news that she had seen the Lord and that he had told her. Which is really interesting because for her to hold on to him could have caused, because he hadn't brought himself before God as the I can't think of the word, not the literal sacrifice, but in his duty as the priest, yep, but also bring himself not as a literal sacrifice, but as a what can I think of it? Metaphorical, not really metaphorical, but something like that, basically. Sacrifice before God. Because remember, God doesn't accept human sacrifice from anybody.
Still, he would have been unclean.
He would.
Purified first.
Right.
So he had to go to the temple.
He had to go to the temple, yep.
And so she was becoming unclean by touching him.
Right. Yeah, he had been dead, yep.
Don't touch me yet, I'm still unclean.
I didn't take it as actually touching him.
Well, it said,
I
he
took
said,
it as holding his attention.
oh,
Hmm.
new way to look at it.
That's
but I
another way
think
to look at it too. Yeah, and that's possibly true that maybe she wasn't going to touch him and stuff. But yeah, the thing is that he hadn't gone to the heavenly temple before God to be purified, in that sense. Because remember, he had been dead, even though he had been raised from the dead. Even Lazarus, who was raised from the dead, had to go through the purification ritual. Okay, because he had been dead.
And anyone who touched him.
And anyone who touched him prior to that would have had to go through the 7-day purification ritual. And so we know that in essence that anyways, that he would have gone through a ritual purification as well. And so what's neat though is that it says that when God gathers us, when Yeshua comes and gathers us together, that he's going to sprinkle water on us to make us purified. No longer, because in essence we are dead. Right now we are impure to really be in the presence of God and to be in his kingdom, which will be here on earth, not in heaven. Nobody goes to heaven. God never designed or even says that we go to heaven. Now, there's been certain people who have gone there only to bring back their prophecy, that what God wants them to see. That's it, right? But nobody, even, there's hundreds of verses that talk about that we die, we sleep. And death in the grave. Death is when we die, but we sleep in the grave. And when that the great trumpet sounds, we will be resurrected at the beginning. There's two resurrections. There's the one at the beginning of the 1,000 year, where Yeshua comes and he will gather his people, even those who have been dead, and bring them back to Israel. And then at the end of the 1,000-year reigns, after the great battle, the great war of Armageddon, there will be the great judgment, the second judgment, as it talks about in Revelation. And even though you may be part of the second judgment, people will still probably, they'll be judged on what they did and stuff, and that they will still make it into the kingdom on earth. But there's going to be a lot of them. And it talks about that in Ezekiel too, where it says at that time, is talking about at that judgment, that all those who didn't follow God, who chose not to follow God, that it says that, and he's talking about the adversary as well, that a fight, this is after the 1,000-year reign, when the adversary is released, he's able to gather an army of people who have gone through this miraculous time, and yet able to gather an army of people to fight God, to fight his Messiah. And once that's over with, the second judgment happens. Those people that are found in the book of the wicked and the book of the ordinary, who are then placed in, they chose to reject God. Those in the book of the ordinary who during this time have chosen to follow God, then will be written into the book of the righteous, or the life. Okay, but those in the book of the wicked are going to be taken, and it says that in Ezekiel that a fire will come from within you, it will consume you, you will become ashes on the ground, and you will cease to exist. And that's why Yeshua says, don't fear those who can kill your body. Fear him who can kill both your body and your soul. That's one of the things we need in this country, in this world, is to fear God. Not be afraid of him, but know that God is a righteous God, and his judgments are going to be for good or evil. Reward for doing good, punishment for doing evil. And being a sovereign God, he's not going to leave sinners in their state forever. That's why he wouldn't allow Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of life. That's why he kicked them out of the garden. Okay? But even then, God's going to, in essence, put them out of their misery, and they will cease to exist. We need to understand that. We need to fear God in that way, that He means what He says, and He says what He means. You know, He does what He says. He's going to do it. His promises have come out. He's got the promises, and remember, you know, when we talk about people going to hell, and I hear people say, "Well, God's going to send me to hell." No, you send yourself. God has given us free will. We can choose. And that's why He sent our Messiah Yeshua. He's given us the opportunity, not only for Israel. He is the King of Israel. He came for Israel, but He also came from those in the nations who will take hold, as it says in Zechariah 8:23. Take hold of a Jewish man's corner of his garment and say, we want to go with you because God is with you. Right? This time period of Yeshua doing this, and the story of Joseph, you know, Joseph is his brothers betray him, right, and sell him to the Gentiles, right? And then we read about Judah. So there's a separation there. That's part of the story. There's a separation there. 20 years. And then we start reading about Joseph. Now he's, you know, okay, he goes through some different things there, different trials, stuff like that. But pretty soon, all of a sudden, he's the leader in Egypt, you know, other than Pharaoh. And they have to come to him. In order to get food to survive. What we need to look at too is that not only is it a physical famine, but it's a spiritual famine. Why? Because God hid from Jacob what was being done. Even though he knew of the dreams that Joseph had before he left, God hid these things from him because there's something in there. And during that time period, even we have no prophets. None like the great prophets. I mean, there might be people who can prophesy and stuff, but they're not prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah and so forth, you know, Samuel and so forth. Okay? There are none because in essence we're living in a famine, a spiritual famine, you know. But the time is coming to an end. That time is coming to an end. And as we've seen because of October 7th, Israel has begun to recognize Yeshua as a brother. The Palestinians tried to steal him. If you didn't know that, they tried to steal him, that say he was a Palestinian, that his parents were Palestinian refugees, stuff like that. And many famous rabbis in Israel, including Rabbi Shmuel Boteach, came out and said, in defending him, said, no, he is our brother. He is a Jewish brother. He's a rabbi. He does not belong to you. He belongs to us, right? That's just like what happened with Joseph, with his brothers. When Benjamin he was going to take Benjamin, leave him there, send them back, right? Judah stood up and said, no, you can't do this. This is going to kill my father. This is, you know, all these different things, right? In essence, it's showing repentance, okay? And it's at that time that Joseph finally reveals himself too, right? So the time is short. Yeshua is going to reveal himself to his people. Even Paul says that right now they're blind, but what is it going to be like when they are alive again, when the Messiah is revealed to them? It's going to be life from death, right? It's the dry bones that Ezekiel talks about too. You know, the bones are together, the skin and everything's on them, but the spirit isn't in them yet, but it's breathing on them now. And we're seeing it, and it's in us too. We're part of that. And it says at that time, in those days, that God is going to anoint them, and they're going to have dreams and visions and stuff like that. Right? All the people will be. When Moses had to, you know, God told him to take 70 men and bring them up. He would put a portion of his spirit on each one of them, and they prophesied. And one of the men came to Moses and said, there's two guys who didn't come out in the camp prophesying. Should we go stop them? Like, I pray that all Israel would prophesy, right? And that's what we're going to see. we will. We're starting to see it. So remember, Yeshua came. He did die for us, but God raised him. He's coming again. He came as Messiah, son of Joseph, the suffering servant, right? Joseph was a suffering servant. We see that. But then he came as the king, right? And that's what Yeshua's part is. Not only has he been the suffering Messiah, the suffering servant, but now he is going to come as the son of David, the conquering king, conquering death, conquering the nations that have disobeyed and hate God. Where does America stand? I don't know. But it does say that in the end, all nations will turn on Israel. And for 4 years, we thought that was going to happen, the last 4 years. It still can happen. I think God's given us a reprieve, but we really need to change to keep that from happening. The United States has been an ally of Israel, but you know what? Not a very trustworthy ally. And we need to realize that. Everything that goes on in this world, we need to watch Israel. I think of Trump as the great Cyrus, who allowed Israel to go back, the captive Jews to go back and rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. Gave them everything they needed to do it, even protected them. Cyrus, the king of Persia, yep. And even Israel, which is funny, in Trump's first term, they actually made a coin in Israel with Cyrus the Great and Trump on there together. I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying that it's comparable. Just like we compare Joseph to Yeshua in that sense too, or Moses and so forth, Maybe too soon. Yeah, I don't know. And that's the thing too. Now, just before we go here, is that in these last days now, the third temple isn't going to be built until Yeshua comes back. But remember, we've talked about this before. What we're waiting for to know how close we are is when Israel is allowed to build altar back on the Temple Mount. Because all I need is the altar to begin the sacrifices again. As we read in Revelation, that it'll be started for a time and then it'll be cut off. Okay, that the adversary, the beast, the anti-Messiah, will then cut it off, remember? Yeah, 3.5 years, part of the tribulation. Yeah. Then the Great Tribulation will begin. So that's all we need to look for. So we're not looking for, there's other things we're looking at. We can see that the times are getting short, but how short? When we see that altar be built and then begin to, they've got the priests already ready to go. As soon as they're given the chance, they will go. They even have, during this time, even during the holidays, the festivals and stuff, they have a caravan of priests that go throughout Israel with an altar, not a real altar, but just to show people how the sacrifices would go. Not with real animals, because we can't sacrifice because there's no temple. But they go around and they show, and they train them and stuff like that. They've got the uniforms, everything. Even the Levitical choir is back. And we've played some music from them on here. Beautiful, So there's a lot of things. Even the Sanhedrin is back, although they don't have the power like they did before. The Sanhedrin is back as well. So the time is short. The days are short. So choose whom you will follow, right? But we're going to follow God and His Messiah. And we need to make that choice. He's put life and death, good and evil, blessing and curse before us. But we get to choose. We get to choose. All right, go ahead and bow your heads for the priestly blessing. Bless us with the threefold blessing and the Torah written by the hand of Moses, your servant, and pronounced by Aharon and his sons, the priests, your holy people, as it is. May the Lord bless you and protect you. If you will. On you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you. lecha b'chnecha. Yitzchak lecha v'chem lecha shalom. Go in peace for the rest of Shabbat, but also the rest of Passover. Tuesday night we begin again our Torah Club study, and Wednesday night we have our other study continuing on with Taming the Tongue by Mark Kinzer, and then Shabbat next week as well. So, and the end May and the 1st of June is when Shavuot is. So, but I'll get all that stuff out there for services and stuff. We'll probably do a community picnic or something on Sunday, the last day of June. But I'll get things out there so that we can get things figured out. But other than that, thank you all for coming. So, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos.